I want to try something new. I want to simplify the anatomy and the anatomy construction as much as we can simplify. And I was drawing and looking at different ways of looking at the proportions. And I was trying to break it down into sections. We have some knowledge of anatomy, like, for example, the 8 head proportions, which again we can simplify it by halves, quarters, and the eighths if we think that the figure is 8 heads tall. You know, that's already quite a process. So we got the head, we got the rib cage, we got the pelvis, and the legs are just as long as the upper body. There's another way of thinking about the proportions, not with the head as the unit of measurements, but this cranium, the round width of the head, which is 2/3 of the head. And a lot of artists look at that as a way of finding the measurements. So there might be different ways. So I was thinking of how to simplify this when you're actually constructing the figure. So in this case, I want to draw the side view and I want to think about these different proportions. So I'm going to take the halfway point. That is definitely a helpful way of simplifying this problem. And I want to go with these major masses of the body and think of how to do that a little bit simpler. So I already done that before. And one thing that I suggest with the gesture is that we try to get that action of the torso figured out from the pubic bone to the base of the neck. And I guess to make that a little bit simpler, I want to figure out where these points would actually be. Pubic bone is there. Where is the pit of a neck? And this is where the cranium might come in helpful. One thing that I want you to remember is that, first of all, our rib cage is about 1.5 times taller than our pelvis area. So if we divide it into sections, it will be 2 to 3 sections tall. That becomes quite helpful in there. So as I'm traveling, I know I'm going to make my rib cage taller, my pelvis a little bit smaller. Well, then what is that section up here? Well, if we look over here, it's about 2 craniums, which becomes helpful. So I'm trying to do a side view in here. And again, from the pit of the neck to the back of the skull, this round portion right here, that's about the same, about halfway. We can actually draw that sternomastoid muscle that connects them. And then we can suggest that there's the highest point for the top of the skull, and then it slopes down towards the forehead, which is halfway down that round shape of the back of the skull. That's where we get to the eyebrow line. And then we can just give a slope and add that third 1/3 to the bottom for our jaw. and we're going to get the head. So from here, the rib cage actually keeps on going up, and then we just make that difference of 3 to 2 heights. And we suggest that change of the angle, the action line, the curve, exactly how much it's bending, and the compression on the other side. So we maybe even overlapping like this. Now the pubic bone becomes important to get that measurement. That measurement happens to be also really useful because if we now take that same measurement and transfer it over here from the ilium crest to the knee, the bottom of the knee, it would be actually quite equal. And that is a nice little rhythmic way of, even though there is a little bit of overlapping and we're not starting from the pubic bone, but it's a really beautiful way of overlap and create some kind of rhythm through this. And remember, I try to stretch the muscles and go from where they start to where they end, and that wants to go underneath the knee, and the lower leg goes from above the knee to the foot. So again, if I stretch that, a little bit opposite curve, I'm simplifying the curve a little bit too, just giving a little bit of force with which it's bending, but keeping it simple. Notice it's also the same length. From above the knee to the bottom of the foot, it's about the same length. So we got 1, 2, 3, and this section is a little bit smaller. So this is to this about the same as this is to this. It's 2 to 3 sections, which is very similar to the idea of the golden mean. If you're familiar with that golden ratio, golden mean, how this is relating to this. But the whole idea of golden mean is the fact that it's somewhat of interesting relationship to each other, where it's not one section that overwhelms the other. It's not too much bigger than another. It's just a little bit bigger, and therefore it creates a little bit of a harmony. We're not overwhelmed by one section over the other. It gives us a relatively nice off-center placement for things. So in this case, we're finding these relationships. They're very close. 3 to 2 maybe is not exactly golden mean. They say 5 to 3 is a little bit closer. But you know, there is actually a specific number for that specific geometry that artists are very interested in. All right, so that kind of helps us to get to that essence. And if I try to do that again now in 3/4 view, again, I'm going to start thinking about where my figure is going to be, where the center of the figure is. And I'm thinking of this section to this, it's about 3 to 2, more or less. Actually, in the drawing, I can see it's more like 4 to 2, but it's going like this. We find 3 to 2. We find stretch and the compression. We find the pit of a neck to the back of the head. And you can figure out the tilt of the head, the tilt of the face. Then you use the tilt of the leg and the tilt of the pelvis into the tilt of the leg. And let's start from where the ilium crest would be and stretch under the knee and over the knee, a foot. And then we think about what we want to do with the other foot. And with the arms, I didn't think about it in terms of these proportions, but I do know that my shoulder blade needs to be about 3/4 of the head, not quite as big as the face. And then from there, it starts to bend and curve for the arm, which is about 3 craniums, the same size of the rib cage. In this case, it will be very foreshortened as it moves away from us. And again, we want to think about where it's going to go. And then from the elbow, I decide where it's going to bend. In this case, it's a very subtle bend. I'm trying to eliminate the details and just think about where these different sections are going to be. The forearm is going to be just a little bit smaller than the upper arm by about 1/4 of the head. Again, this is a head and a half. This is a head and 1/4 to the wrist. And then the hand is 3/4, similar to the sternum and the collarbone. And of course, half of it is the palm and the other half of it is fingers. So that allows us to kind of get general proportion and the rhythmic block in of the gesture. Put in some ideas of volumes in there. Think about the center line and think about placing these ellipses in the perpendicular way to that center line. So we can start feeling how things are wrapping around in a perspectivals manner. So we're actually developing space and not warping it by having too round, too generalized of ellipses. We need those ellipses to be very specific as they wrap around the space. And you can think about the anatomical parts like bottom of the muscles, for example, as they wrap around anything, the corner of the stomach, if there is one, and the waist, if there's 6 packs, they can start giving us ideas of how things wrap around. Above the knee, there is a narrowing of that space because the muscles start rounding off, getting a little bit wider. And above here, that's where the muscles start ending and there's a little bit of a bending that happens in there. So these are the perfect places to put these elliptical forms. Definitely where muscles end and maybe where the muscles are the widest or the muscles kind of stop. So later on we can use these landmarks that we found and start creating a little bit more of a sense of the form, maybe a little bit less geometric and more gestural. And kneecap, maybe going like this to follow that idea of ellipses going this way. And the same thing for the arms. So if I drew this ellipse this way, exposing the top of the shoulder, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, that allows me to feel that this arm is going back, but then it is coming forward again. Add a little bit of the gestural curves in the right direction. A natural direction for these parts. this way, that way. For the arm, maybe we can go that way, this way, this way for the hand. And we have nice wire work for the rest of the figure. All we got to do now is construct the smaller forms inside. And, you know, if we keep that fairly light, that just becomes a framework that helps you out to get the right references to do whatever type of drawing you're planning on doing, whether it's a contour drawing, whether it's a shading. You don't necessarily need to make a mannequin-like figure, a robot in here. These can be very light. So I go through that process just one more time, a little bit lighter. You know, we got the top, bottom, we got the middle, we got a torso going like this. Thinking about these proportions really quickly. Where is this in relationship to this? Trying to think of doing something different here, maybe. Something like that.